As we're approaching the trade deadline, where is my confidence with Doug Armstrong?
Hey, this is Brandon Chen. Subscribe to Locked On Blues.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On Blues. I am your host of Locked On Blues, Haley Taylor Simon, talking to you all things about our St. Louis Blues here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today on Locked On Blues, I have a couple of things that I need to talk about when it comes to my confidence in Doug Armstrong and if he is going to make any moves during this trade deadline period. I also want to talk about why I want Nathan Walker to play more. I know that sometimes he is a healthy scratch. I just think that with Nathan Walker being on the ice more, there is a lot of benefits that maybe we're not seeing. And then, of course, I do have my bold predictions about kind of how January is going to finish up here for the Blues. They're hosting the Golden Knights tonight after that 5-4 shootout win previously on Tuesday night. So I do want to talk about where I think the Blues are going to end up. They're at 50 points now. And I want to kind of give my thoughts on if they're going to be in the playoffs or not. So we have a lot of fun things in today's episode that we are going to talk about. But I want to let you know that from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. When it comes to the trade deadline and the trade deadline approaching kind of quickly, I have to think to myself that the Blues need to do something more than they did last season, which was absolutely nothing. And I think that too, at the same time, this trade deadline, at least for me, is going to be a big one. I think there's a lot of players right now in the NHL that could potentially be these trade targets. And I can get into the players. I know I talked about Keandre Miller from the New York Rangers, the mid-20s defenseman. But I want to more specifically talk about Doug Armstrong and why I think he should approach the deadline in a more aggressive nature. So here's the thing. Last season, the Blues made no moves during the deadline. Obviously, PK Subban, who was on the T-Birds, which is our AHL team, was traded. But other than that, nothing. And I think for the Blues, they're in the middle right now. They're not the best team in the NHL, and they're not the worst team in the NHL. Well, where exactly does that lead St. Louis? In a position where they need to make a decision fast. On this show, on social media, I have been talking to you and I have been telling you and articulating to you that the Blues need to figure out their identity. Are they a playoff bound team or are they a team that kind of needs to tank to get a good draft pick? Now, this upcoming draft class is good, and I have talked about that too, and I will do a whole entire episode if you want on some of the prospects that I like because there's quite a few. But I think that a decision is going to be made within the next couple of weeks. And here's why. You were still in the race to get that second wildcard spot. You are. Canucks are above you, right? Flames are above the Canucks. We know that. But I think that Doug Armstrong, he did too much this offseason for the Blues not to be a playoff contending team. He did something that you haven't seen in a while with the offer sheets, not just one, but two, getting Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway from the Edmonton Oilers. So I feel like there has been this sense of pressure put on the Blues to be this playoff-bound team. Not just by me, not just by you maybe, if you're a Blues fan, but by the national media. Okay? And I think that's something that I want to really highlight is that, NHL Network, TNT, every single national media platform, ESPN, they all have the Blues heading into the season being a playoff kind of contending team. Now, obviously, the Blues haven't had the season that they wanted to have so far. It hasn't been going their way a lot, but they still are in the middle, which means that the needle can either head in their direction or not. And I think that's a really big thing to keep in mind too when you're thinking about the future and identity of this team. As I mentioned, beginning of the episode, they had a 5-4 shootout win against the Vegas Golden Knights. And I think for the Blues, that is kind of a statement win. Yes, they were leading by 2 goals heading into the final frame. Obviously, Vegas was able to tie up the game, but I think it goes to show that the Blues do have some fight left in them. They beat the Flames in those 2 games at home, the pair of games, which was the schedule is weird, okay? But I think that's showing, hey, the Blues are not out of this race yet. And I think if they were to lose against the VGK, and I'm not saying that splitting with them is the worst thing, but if they lose tonight against the VGK, they're not getting those points. And right now, the points are so crucial. And I know it's January 23rd. I know this isn't, who's going to be in the playoffs. I know that. But you can't look back to the year that we won the cup and think to yourself, oh, yeah, this is normal. No, it is not normal. The Blues were in last place in the West at the end of January in the 2018-2019 season, and we're still able to manage literally the impossible with winning the cup. And I think, too, you can take a look back at that season and you can kind of say, oh, well, there's still time, but there's not as much time now with how competitive the Central Division is and the West is. I'm not even talking about the East because that does not matter for us here, but all around the NHL, there is a sense of the better division. And I have said this for the past few years that the West has been overall the better conference. The Pacific is obviously, I think, the most competitive division. And that's why Doug Armstrong does need to attack when it comes to the trade deadline. Because at the end of the day, and here's the thing, you need to get some players that are going to be able to bring the energy. And I'm not seeing that in a sense from some of the guys that we have here. And I don't want some of these players that might be older. Another player, too, a defenseman, is Ivan Provorov, left-handed defenseman from the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, the thing about Ivan Provorov is he is 27, so he's still under that 30 range, which is, I think, a really good thing. Right now, he had a contract for $4.7 million, and he becomes an unrestricted free agent in July. So, again, I just think it's one of those things where you really could attack him and get him, and maybe too with Ivan Provorov, you could then maybe use him for the second pairing and then put Suter back down, and then I don't know what you're gonna do with Justin Folk. I just don't think he's had a great season, but I know you can't get rid of him. I'm just saying, I'm talking out loud here because it is important to have these honest conversations, okay? And another player too that's been making a lot of headwaves is Morgan Frost. Morgan Frost plays center for the Philadelphia Flyers. He's only 24 years old. Right now, his contract is $2.1 million, and he's a restricted free agent in July. But here's the thing. Frost is young, he's skilled, and he doesn't really get along with the head coach of the Flyers, John Tortorella. So I feel like he would be somebody that would really benefit on the Blues. It's funny, when I think of Morgan Frost and how he plays, I think a lot of Jordan Kyrou in a sense, except less turnovers. But they're very similar players in a sense. And then another player too that is kind of interesting. It's Jake Evans, center from the Canadians, but I don't really want centers, right? I know that the centers that we do have a lot of prospects, but I'm talking about this season. He could be a good pick. He's only making $1.7 million, and he becomes an unrestricted free agent in July. Marcus Pettersson, left-handed defenseman from the Penguins, 20 years old. He is making more money, though, obviously, $4 million. So that's something to keep in mind. But again, I think at the end of the day, you could have players like Rasmus Anderson. You could have Ian Cole. but I really want to focus on maybe the players that could be here longer than a couple of seasons. Maybe you could see them being here for 4 to 5 seasons. It's all about the bigger picture and just building that core. So again, I'm not saying that 30 is old in real life, but in hockey it is. And unless you're a goalie, I feel like when you're above the age of 30, I have to then question, well, what is the longevity, right, of you being here on this team? So that is my thoughts on that one. I want to talk to you about why I do want to see Nathan Walker play more, because I am a big fan of the Aussie. But first, I want to tell you about my friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. For me personally, I think the FanDuel app is so easy to use and navigate. I love being able to make my parlays, my same game parlays, absolute favorite thing to do. Love doing it for the NFL. I know we only have a couple more weeks left. We have the championship games this weekend for the NFC and AFC, and then we have the Super Bowl in a couple weeks. So you need to get those parlays in. Listen, right now, Eagles money line, they're -6.5. I think that's a really good spread. So honestly, I would take that. But yes, FanDuel is the best, not just for football, all sports, but I'm a little biased when it comes to betting on football. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Nathan Walker is one of those players that I just really enjoy. I don't know if it's because the energy that he has on the ice, but I feel like he is a player that we don't talk about enough on this podcast. And it is a shame. And it's not because I don't want to talk about Nathan Walker, it's because he's not always in the games. And it's not because, he's a bad hockey player by any means. And I think that they just kind of rotate him in and out, and I get why, but I want to talk specifically more about him this season because I am a little bit frustrated for him this season. So he has played, I will say, he has played 41 games this season, which again is kind of heading towards some of the most games he's played in a season, which is kind of cool. He's had 5 goals, 4 assists, and 9 points overall. Highest amount of penalty minutes, though, he's ever had, with 29 in a single season so far, and he is averaging about 11 minutes and 40 seconds on ice. So why is it maybe for me that I want to see more of Nathan Walker? Well, a couple of things. When I think Nathan Walker's on the ice, he does bring a lot of momentum and energy, and I think that's something that maybe is not, I don't want to say laxed amongst other players, but he definitely has a spark about him and he's not afraid to throw the punches. And I like that about him. But another reason why is because I think that it makes him look good when he's on the ice, and especially with what's going on right now. Now, obviously, and I did talk to Nathan Walker about this. I want to say last year when he signed his contract, but he signed a 2-year contract last year for about 1.5 million. So here's the thing. The contract will end next season. At the end of the next season, he'll be 32. I am in this position right now, and I don't know if it's because I'm just so focused on the trade deadline, but I don't want to move Nathan Walker. I like watching him play. I just said that. 2 things can be true. I just think, too, at the same time, that maybe if you want to move him, you need to showcase him. And that frees up the cap space to then potentially get just a bigger player that's younger and can be with this team for a little more time. Do I think Nathan Walker is the difference maker in this team being a playoff team or not? No. And I'm not saying that to be mean, malicious, and it has nothing to do with him as a person, even as a player, but I just don't think, and it's the same thing with Oscar Sundqvist. I could say the same thing about him too, or Alexei Turchenko. I think that just in general, you have some players that get the job done. They're fine on the ice, but they're not going to drive the needle to make you the different. They're not the difference makers between a playoff team and not a playoff team. And I mentioned some names, and some of those guys have some contracts that are at a little bit higher than I would personally be paying for. So if you're able to move players like a Nathan Walker or an Oscar Sundquist, then why not? And I know the whole, well, they love it here in St. Louis. And yeah, again, two things can be true. You can enjoy a player can enjoy their time here and not want to leave. I don't think there's many players that are like, oh yeah, I want to be traded. I mean, I'm sure there's some, but the general consensus is that not all the time. And the goal isn't to all, and this doesn't sound harsh, and maybe this is just my opinion, just watching this team all the time and being a fan. I love the Blue Note and I love the Blues. I don't play for the Blues. These players play for the Blues. And if they're not getting the job done, or there's a player that could be doing a better job, I would rather that happen and have this team go to the playoffs. I want to see the Blues hoist the cup soon. I don't want to have to wait my whole life again to see them. Now, granted, I only had to wait 20 some years to see it, but it still was a little bit too long. And I want them to be a contending team. They're always the team that people talk about, oh, the Blues, they're just so inconsistent. Well, I think Nathan Walker, getting back to my Nathan Walker topic, I just think that he does bring that consistency. And I think too, and I know that there's coaching changes and things like that, from Coach Bannister to then, Coach Montgomery. But I really liked Nathan Walker on that fourth line, the WTF line. And it bothers me so much how the lines are always changing. I believe the Blues have the most line combo changes in the NHL, or they're one of the top teams too, from the last time I saw. A fun statistic. I love stats like that. But I think that's something to point out because I feel like he doesn't get talked about enough, but he does contribute when he's on the ice. And I feel like his season isn't horrible. And that's the thing. Sometimes players that don't always put up points actually do well, but the statistics won't show it. And if you're on the ice for about 11 minutes, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, yeah, maybe there's not a whole lot you can do as compared to a guy that's on the ice for over 20 minutes. That's a lot of time. That's half the time, basically. A little bit more actually than, a little bit less actually than half the time. And I think it's so easy for us to always talk about Robert Thomas, Jordan Cairo, Braden Shen, Bushi, Neighbors, but the third and the fourth line players are just as important, if not more, because they're the guys that you still have to rely on. And I think that when I've had conversations with Nathan Walker and we've talked, both times he's been in the city that I live in. He actually did a little promo too for this podcast. I went with Shen's, but I still have Nathan's. And I think that he is just such a good teammate and he loves being here. And I know how excited he was to play in the Winter Classic and how, special that was for him. I mean, he is the only Australian player in the NHL right now. So he is a unique guy, 100%. But it's the way that he is in the locker room and how supportive he is, and you can really tell how much he loves it, and I don't want him to be traded. I'm just saying that there is benefits to maybe showing him off a little bit more, putting him in better positions. I don't think that Coach Montgomery is doing anything to not do that necessarily. I just think that the priority is obviously being able to showcase your first and second line type of players and to be able to have a strong defensive core. And maybe it's not just a priority, maybe not even to you. Maybe you're like, oh my gosh, you're talking about Nathan Walker out of all people. But I do think he is somebody worth talking about. Either way, if he is here next season, if they don't move him, I want him to be able to have, a good role on this team. I don't want him to be healthy scratched or, moving in and out of the lineup. I want him to have that consistency. So again, let me know your thoughts on Nathan Walker down below. All right, I know you're going to want my bold predictions, and I have some to give to you. But first, I want to tell you about my friends over at Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or maybe even the WWE. One of my favorite memories was attending Monday Night Raw last October, and the energy and excitement were unforgettable. Yeet. Nail Game Time heads made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I'm looking for tickets for Friday Night SmackDown in March, and I'm using the Game Time app. And with Game Time Picks, I found amazing deals, and I could even see the view from my seat before buying the ticket. The super deal was perfect, particularly impressive, offering great seats and unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Again, create an account and redeem code for Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. I am going to make a bold prediction. And maybe you will think I'm crazy. Maybe you will agree with me. But I have a couple bold predictions, and it kind of goes with each other. Number one, I think the Blues, and again, it really depends on January. So I'm going to kind of, and before I do this, because I want you just to at least know who the Blues will be playing. So they have the VGK tonight. They have the Dallas Stars on Saturday. They have the Canucks on Monday. And then they have the Avalanche on Friday. That's why I said January is a really big month for the Blues, especially how they finish off. Because again, VGK West, Stars obviously one of the better teams, top three teams right now in the Central. Obviously, the Canucks, that's who's above you right now. And then you have the Avalanche, again, another team in the Central. So you have teams that you really need to beat and get those points. So if the Blues win 3 out of the next 5, I think they're going to go and be a playoff team. That's my bold prediction. I really do believe that. Because while it's easy for me to say that, I feel like this is going to be kind of like a playoff type of stretch of games. These are not going to be easy games by any means. You're not playing any team that is below 500, which again proves to me, hey, maybe this team does have what it takes. But I also think if the Blues come out of this, maybe winning 2 out of 5 or 1 out of 5 or even none, no, it's no playoffs because you cannot get into the playoffs. You just won't be able to. Like the math, it could always math, right? But you're counting on way too many things to be happening. You're going to have to be hoping for the Canucks' downfall. You're going to have to be hoping for the Flames' downfall. And it's upsetting because you just beat the Flames twice, right? Then you beat the Golden Knights in a shootout. Yes, they got a point. Does it matter that the VGK got a point? Not really, because again, they're the top team in the Pacific Division, so it doesn't impact you. They're not taking a wild card spot from you. So again, that is my prediction. Here's my other bold prediction, because I just said a positive prediction in a sense. My other prediction is this, and this is where I said you might hate me. And I hate that I'm saying this. I think if the Blues don't make the playoffs this season, I think they're going to trade Jordan Binnington. Did I hear any rumors? No. Do I really think that's going to happen? No. Then why am I saying it? Because it makes sense to me. When you think of players on the Blues that have the most value still, I think of 2 players in particular, Jordan Binnington and Robert Thomas. That's my top 2 most value. And then I would say Jordan Kyrou and then go on and go on. I think that Jordan Binnington is such a great goalie. I do. But I think the Blues also have Joel Hofer, who you've seen step up in situations and really prove himself as a netminder. I do. I think the Blues would go into a tank mode in a sense and really try to rebuild. I think for Jordan Binnington, it's not fair to him and his career to be on a team that isn't going to allow him to experience a playoff run again. And I'm not saying that because I don't believe in the Blues. Of course I do. I'm a fan. I love the Blues. I think that you could get a lot in return for him. And there's a lot of teams in the NHL that need goalies. And I think that the Blues are in a situation where we do have some good prospects, right? But I just can't see him staying on this team for such an extended amount of time if the Blues are not finding any success. So again, that is my bold predictions. What prediction do I want to come true? The first one, obviously, I want this team to go to the playoffs, but I'm telling you, these next 5 games are very crucial and vital to the season and the outcome of the season. So let me know your thoughts on that down below. I want to remind you, if you're listening to Locked On Blues, if you're listening on the podcast or you're watching on YouTube, to subscribe to Locked On Blues on YouTube. Leave a comment, say hello, let me know your thoughts. I love being able to see what you're thinking, especially when it comes to discussions like this and bold predictions. Also, I'm on Twitter at Locked On Blues, where we talk all things St. Louis Blues. We sometimes talk statistics, what's going on with the games. And I try to tweet now during the games. I'm not always the best at that because I just like to watch and focus and take notes. But again, make sure you're following Twitter at Locked On Blues. There is so much that we can talk about here on this podcast. And I think it's really cool that, we're in a position where we can talk about the what ifs heading into the playoffs and the what ifs if we just head immediately into that offseason because we did not get into the playoffs. Not that I want that to happen, but being a team in the middle, it gives you so much to talk about. And I enjoy doing that. Again, my name is Haley Taylor Simon. This has been year 2 of hosting Locked On Blues. So again, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and join the chat down below. And tomorrow on Locked On Blues, we will be talking about the results from this game, hosting the Las Vegas Golden Knights, and what exactly this game meant, if it was a big 2 points or if the Blues didn't gain any points and it was just a really ugly game. Also on Fridays, we do a fun segment. It's my favorite segment, actually. I began doing this segment, I think it was my first week having this podcast, and it's called Are We Feeling Blue? Where you let me know, was this a good week or was this a bad week for the St. Louis Blues? In TikTok terms, it's like a boom or it's like a doom. We have fun on this podcast all the time. So again, thank you so much again for subscribing. And how I end every single episode, let's go Blues.